Welcome to CTO Think, a podcast about leadership, product development, and tech decisions between two recovering chief technology officers. Here are your hosts, Don Vandemark and Randy Burgess.
Hey, Randy, what are you doing this week?
Back from a week off. It feels like
Nice.
it feels like we haven't talked for 3 or 4 weeks. Maybe that's because I had a break where I pulled my computer out, but not for work. So Megan and I went to Kansas, where she's from, and visited some friends in a community called Lake Quivira, and just hung out there with them, played tennis, played golf poorly, sat on the lake. We did really well at sitting on the lake. In fact, we were excellent at that. The golf, people can question whether we were even playing. But yeah, it was a good break. We have talked about burnout in recent episodes. I was not on the verge of burnout, but it was still nice to take a vacation. We had not really traveled for the summer, so this was our kind of end of the summer, get some time out of the house kind of thing. How about you?
Right. Well, actually been fighting off an ear infection the past 3 or 4 days. Been a real pain in the neck. Absolutely floored me. So, but getting better there. And then last week we actually, for Aspire EDU, actually underwent a big change, and that's something I wanted to talk about today. So what we did for Aspire EDU was, to this point, all our clients have been in one database. And when you start a company, you've got 5 clients, 10 clients, 20, 40, so on and so forth. And that just expands. And as they all stay in one database, that just grows the size of your database. So we had been just continually upgrading the size of the database we were using in Heroku. And I think we'd finally reached the point where we had gone about as large as you should go. There were databases we could have gone larger too within Heroku, but that would have only increased the storage. It would not have increased the memory or the number of connections for the database. And where we were starting to see a little bit of performance hit was in the number of connections and in the number of and in the memory.
Yeah.
So we knew we had to make a change. And we knew we had to make a change because here it is, September, the start of fall semesters.
Yeah.
So at all the clients we had added over the summer, while we had added them, we knew we hadn't seen the full force of the number of students they could bring when this fall semester came. So while we were all away, we at the InstructureCon convention, we put together a plan to split the database up, and it made me nervous. It's one of those big changes that I think it's okay to be nervous about. It makes you nervous because you're like, what if something goes wrong? Because we have an incredibly good uptime here. I got to find some wood to knock on.
Yeah.
We have some incredibly good uptime to where we are hardly ever down. So we didn't want to go down, but we also knew we had to do something or else we were going to start to see real performance hits.
If you told me that you were like, nah, this is cool, knock it out of the park, not too worried about it, I would wonder about your sanity at that point in the chain. This is not, I mean, I don't know any company, unless you have no customers, who would consider this a lightweight effort with low risk effort kind of thing.
Right. And the thing about it is all we're really doing is we're just copying databases and just pointing the different clients to new ones. So in essence, it's a fairly simple change. but it's also one that could go wrong. And if you point them in the wrong ones, and then you start deleting all the old ones, all of a sudden you've really created a mess. So we went through it. We got to the point where all the work had been prepared. We were looking to do it over a weekend, and then we noticed that the first weekend we were going to do it was Labor Day. Yeah. And one of our developers was out of town. The next weekend we had a developer out of town. So all of a sudden we couldn't do it over a weekend, which was like, now we're even more in a pinch. So we sat there and one Monday afternoon we did a dry run, where we took everything that we were going to do for the real thing and executed on it, and just didn't execute that last step of actually making the switch. That way we could come up with anything that we missed along the way. I don't think we actually found any steps on the dry run. Turn around, and on a Wednesday afternoon. So one of the things we had done in preparation was turn our service into read-only mode. Yeah. Because we had the ability to turn it into Django maintenance mode. But that's pretty ugly, and not real stylized, and just doesn't provide the service we wanted. What we really wanted was to just make it so that they couldn't the clients couldn't write anything to our services, so that we could be making all the database changes in the background.
Most maintenance messages by other companies, by a lot of companies, looks like we've gone out of business messaging. Every time I see that, and I see it longer than without notifications or emails, I start searching for, did so-and-so go out of business on Google? Because there's a difference between we just turn the server off and we are graciously down for a small amount of time. And you can tell by the messaging sometimes this is really temporary. But go ahead, sorry.
Right. No, that's okay. And because we prepared, we sent out notes ahead of time saying, hey, we're going to, starting at 5 p.m. Eastern time on Wednesday, we're going to put our site into read-only mode. You can still access all the services. You just won't be able to leave any notes, because that's really all the data that clients can write to our service, are notes on each student. So, so they still have 90% of the functionality, even in read-only mode. Yeah. So that was a good thing that we were able to execute on. So we turned it on Wednesday. By 5:05, the databases were copied. By about 5:15, 5:20, we had made all the changes to all the pointers, so that the clients went to the databases that we had set aside to do it on. Mm-hmm. And at that point it was, okay, let's start checking. So we all started checking. And what we failed to do in the first 20 minutes of checking was actually look at the URL that we were being directed to. We were just pulling up the client and seeing that, yes, the client's there, and yes, all their data's there. Well, after we got about not quite halfway through the check, we were like, oh, wait a minute. We just copied databases. So even if they're pointed at the wrong one, it's still going to look like everything's there. So we had to start over on the check, just to make sure that we were verifying that, yes, the URL is correct, that is headed the right place. So, but that was really the most significant thing that happened to us, was we checked the wrong thing at the start. Other than that, we checked everything. Everything was good. We flipped the switch. So at that point, we were still in read-only mode, and we had said once we turn read-only mode off, that's the point of no return. Yeah. At that point, we're done. Anything that goes wrong, we're pretty much committed to, and we're just going to have to fix whatever's wrong at that point. So We did a check around the table. Everybody was good. And we by about 6 o'clock, about an hour later, we flipped read-only mode off and we were done. So it went extremely smoothly. The big part of our processing day is from about midnight Eastern time till about 6 a.m. Eastern time. We'll go through and pull clients' data.
Yeah.
That's when we pull all the data. So that was the next step was, okay, is all that going to work? In theory, all that should work, and there shouldn't have been any issues with it. But again, it's one of those things of we just have to watch it. So sure enough, come midnight, we'd split one database into 3 total. So we'd left some clients on the original and then created 2 more. Sure enough, come midnight, the original worked, one of the copies worked, and the second copy wasn't doing anything. It was just sitting there. So, so then it's like, okay, we got to figure this out. What's going on? So we started working through it. And what we think ended up, no, not what we think, what we know ended up happening was our RabbitMQ server. We didn't have the right plan on it. So it overloaded memory wise, and it decided it wasn't going to do any of the messages that came through. It was just going to sit there and choke on them. So, which is fine. That's what it's supposed to do when it overloads. So we upped the plan on all the RabbitMQ servers, and it ran just fine.
So can I jump in with some
Yeah,
questions?
that's the end of the story. That's how easy it all was.
Well, now's the fun part, the second guessing from the people that are just that just heard a 5-minute story of your project. Sure. I think the first question, I'll phrase it this way. At no point did I hear the terms dev environment, staging environment, production environment.
Sure.
So that's where, when people talk about big changes on an application that's being used by customers, that's the first thing I start talking about.
Right.
And so why, talk about that.
Sure. So we do have dev environments and staging environments and all that. What we don't have is we don't use our full client base for those environments because that's just too much to be using. We were not, again, what I described was we copied the database and then we changed some pointers. So we had run that test on that part of that run through. We had run that test on the staging environment to make sure that would work just fine. So that's the answer to that. Is we had run those tests on the staging environment. So
then I have a question about your comment. We can't put all of our clients on a staging environment because, and I've been in this same boat too. But the way I look at staging is I can build it up to a complete copy of production all the time, and I can tear it down to nothing that represents production most of the time because I don't need it. I don't need to look at it that long. But I've gone through the clients where the staging environment monthly cost was identical to production for a month or two. And they were like, why is this going up? Price is going up. And I'm like, well, we need to match exactly the data, the memory, the plans, so that we really have identical. But don't worry, once we launch, we're tearing this down back to the 1/3 of the cost hosting for the staging environment. And so I for a while, I don't know why I felt this way. I felt the same way that you did of like, well, we can't afford two identical production environments all the time. But when you use these providers like Heroku and Engine Yard and stuff, you can ramp up things temporarily and they don't care if you tear it down. The whole idea is build up, tear down all the time. So that's my reaction to the statement, we can't host everything on we can't match production on staging. But I don't know.
Well, it's
circumstances are different.
It's cost, and then there's also privacy concerns.
Okay.
So what we can't do is we can't replicate our Australian clients in our normal staging environment because you have to store Australian data and in Australia. So our production environment is set up that way, and our Australian staging environment is set up that way to store all that data over in Australia.
Yeah.
We also have some clients when, as part of their security review, they're like, well, how do you store our data, our students' data? And how long do you retain it for, and things like that. So we have demo environments that we use for most of our test work. And that's not tied to any specific student. It's not a perfect test, but it's a great test. It's a good test of what we do. Yes, cost is one concern, but there are other concerns. When I was working with Blue Shield of California, HIPAA was another concern.
Yeah.
To where if you use production data, you had to anonymize it, which is another major project to anonymize data.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where we were, and that's why you can't always replicate production in staging. You do your best, and you replicate the things that seem most important. But I don't know that I need 200 clients worth of data sitting on my staging environment.
Yeah.
If I can replicate the functionality.
I mean, I think the answer is that yes, you could do it. You could also take a month or two of developer time to handle that and all the privacy concerns. Like, there's a matter of company scale with how much can you match staging to production given privacy in other regions and stuff like that. So it's a valid reason of like, we can't, there are, other than, it's not just cost or price of money, it's, hey, it'll take significant time to have a comparable data set that is safe to use in staging. And that's the valid reason not to have a complete match. So then on the testing, like, even on a small scale, you didn't have you weren't able to do the last minute, like hit the button, but on staging, like, this is what's going to happen. Boom. How do we see things? Like, that's kind of my next question is, how far do you go on staging to flip that switch so that when you do on production, it's almost like there should be no difference here. We've already flipped the switch like 6 or 7 times.
Yeah. And that's what we did. That was part of the whole drive run was doing a lot of that in staging, duplicating the databases, copying the databases, and then changing the pointers in staging.
Yeah.
And then doing some of those checks to make sure they all pointed the right way. So that, I would say that's more of the development effort. So that was more when we were writing the script that was going to change all the pointers.
Yeah.
That's where it got tested, was right there in staging. And by the time it was ready, he had run tests quite a few times to go, yeah, this is going to work exactly as we anticipated. And it did.
Did you have any contingency plans, not written or like formal, and more of like, had you all discussed when you cross the point of no return, but you're like, uh-oh, we have to return? Did you discuss any scenarios where if this doesn't go right, what do we do? Did you have those discussions?
So we did. Really, because we did it at night, there weren't going to be. So as I said, the only thing that is written to our service from the client side are notes that the advisors will write. So while it was a point of no return, once we turned off the read-only switch, if at some point along that route, until maybe the next morning, we decided something gone horribly wrong, we could have reverted back to the single database.
Yeah.
And what we would have lost was anybody that put any notes in from 6 p.m. Eastern time to whenever we pushed it back, which wouldn't have been great. We wouldn't have loved it. Clients would have lost some of those notes. And we probably would have run a query to pull all the notes that we could find and see if we could reinsert them afterwards. So we had plans. I think for the most part, because of the way our system runs, whenever anything happens, we are usually able to figure out the problem and get it working. So I wasn't too concerned. Once we verified that everything was pointing the right place, I wasn't too concerned that we were going to have to completely revert everything.
Yeah.
At that point, it was more a case of, okay, we may have to fix one of the three while the other two are going. And that was the other major win in all of this, is not only did we get to split the database and reduce the burden on a single database. If in processing something goes horribly wrong now, to where it just completely locks up, it's now only locking up a select portion of the clients instead of everybody, because now everybody's not on the same database. And this is only the first cut of this we're going to take. We've got something more elegant to where we're going to be able to, if we choose to, move every client to their own database. But that took more development effort that we weren't ready for in the fall. So that's going to be a major win, because then if something goes wrong, it's only going to affect a handful of clients, whereas the rest of them are going to be untouched and continue running. Yeah. So that was the other win that we just haven't even seen the benefits of yet, but we will see that at some point, I'm sure.
So on the non-tech side of sorts, who else knew about this change from a, hey, we're going to be undergoing a maintenance kind of thing, blah, blah, blah? Like, who did you make sure they knew about this upcoming?
Outside the company?
Inside and outside. Non-technical. Okay. You had developers and yourself. I'm just asking. I'm asking. I'm not challenging. I'm asking just kind of in a scenario sense. Who did you make sure you notified?
So the first thing we did was, once we were ready, and once we on the development team had decided about when we wanted to do it, I ran it by the CEO. I said, here's all the things that can go wrong. Well, first off, I said, here's what we're doing. Here's the list of things we're doing. Here's all the things that can go wrong. 99% of those things that can go wrong, if they go wrong, they'll go wrong before we reach the point of no return. So we'll just hit the reset button. We'll do it another day. Or we'll try again that night until we run out of time that night. So the vast majority of anything that could go wrong, we can just start over and no harm, no foul. The only harm being that we've been in read-only mode.
Yeah.
There's a small chance that after we reach that point of no return, something will go wrong. And then it's about the same chance as if we hadn't made this major change, something went wrong on our software. And in that case, we just solve it. We just figure it out. That's what we've always done. And so I had to answer some hard questions from her about what about the preparation we had done, so that she felt comfortable, because she wasn't comfortable. We weren't going forward with it.
Yeah.
She, at the end of the day, she's the one that talks to all the clients. So she had to answer to them if something goes wrong. So she had to be comfortable, else we weren't going forward.
Yeah.
So once she was comfortable, she crafted a note to everyone. And that was the note that we said, hey, we're going to be in read-only mode for this period of time. You won't be able to write any notes. We're doing it in order to make some changes on our end. And we weren't really all that specific on what we were doing because we didn't see the need to be. But other than that, that's pretty much everything we had done. Was we let the CEO know, and then she in turn around and let the clients know, and that was pretty much all we needed to do. And that's essentially what you need to do on any of these changes. You need to let management know, and you need to let your end users know. There's even question on some changes if you even need to let the end users know. Yeah. We release things all the time where we don't tell the end users that anything's changing. We're on a continuous release cycle. So we change things all the time. Most of them being things that the clients won't notice. If they are things the clients will notice, then it's a feature that we shout from the mountaintops.
Yeah.
We've added. But otherwise, if it's internal, we just make the change and we continue on.
Here's a sidebar question of sorts. Are you still using databases on Heroku, or did you go external?
We're still on Heroku right now.
Yeah.
And this is what I talked about eventually getting to the point where we might even be able to get down to one database per client. That's part of our grander plan.
Yeah.
Of potentially getting off Heroku. We haven't made that decision yet. I still am a firm believer in a lot of the benefits that Heroku gives us. And we pay for it, but they also act as kind of a DevOps shop as well. So
how many DevOps people do you have on staff?
Yeah, 0 full-time dedicated DevOps people.
That's huge.
Yeah. So having Heroku is big. So we're still wrestling with where the next step is. We have a lot of internal discussions on. We're looking at Docker, Kubernetes, that path, but again, that's assuming a lot of burden. And I'd much rather take that intermediate step of what you said, which is everything's on Heroku but the databases, right? Yeah. And we move the databases off on their own, and then we've assumed a little more burden, but not a lot. So there's something to be said there as well.
Yeah, I mean, Heroku pricing on everything seems reasonable to me. The databases is where they punch you in the face.
Well, but even the databases are okay until you cross a certain threshold.
Yeah,
and once you get to a certain size, then it's like, oh, okay, that's a big one. And we had to do that a couple of times over the past couple of years. We'd hit the middle of fall. We'd get so big and we'd be like, yeah, we need to go ahead and crank it up the next step, which was fine. And that's why we did things the way we did them, was so we could do all that.
Yeah.
But I think we're going to aim for non-Heroku databases and leaving everything else on Heroku for now.
Yeah, makes sense. So then on the overall subject of making big changes related to this, what did you learn yourself about the process you all went through that you may do different next time? You didn't have a disastrous scenario where you're like, oh, we have so much to learn from this, but what were your takeaways in general?
Sure. So what I think we did was, and I'm going to accept the burden of responsibility for all these things. So if I'm sounding critical at all, it's things I forgot. So this is all on me. We did do a dry run. We did have in mind what that dry run, what steps we took during that dry run. What we failed to do was actually write down each step.
Yeah.
And have everybody review each step and go, yes, those are the steps we're taking. I only mention it because when the developers made their dry runs, they actually each made their own dry run. They each made assumptions and did it differently.
Yeah.
Did the dry runs differently. So we came to a point where during our actual go time, there was an announcement made that we were ready to turn off read-only mode and pass the point of no return. And this was before we had even checked all the pointers. And that's because somebody had made an assumption that that's when we were going to go off read-only mode, was after we'd copied the databases, not after we had checked all the pointers. I'm not sure why that assumption was made, but that's an assumption somebody made. So we'd all gone through dry runs, but we had failed to agree on the steps. And that, to me, it was such an obvious miss, and I'm not sure how we missed it. But it was something we were able to work out in flight, and go, wait, no, we really don't have to go turn off read-only mode now. And the reason they wanted to do it was they were trying to get out of read-only mode quicker so that there was less impact to clients. And we were like, no, we're good. We're not. There's no need to be in too big a rush here. So that was one of the things, is you got to make sure the steps you have, that everybody's in agreement on what the steps are and that they're written down somewhere.
Well, let me jump in. I think if I can remember, I'm going to tell you how to do it. I have never done this, of course, but what I've heard people talk about, like the military does this kind of thing a lot because they have so many people that have to be doing different processes. And the attitude is, lay out your steps as though a person without any knowledge of the scenario has to follow them.
Sure.
And what happens when you're working with, like, your team is small, you all are very familiar with each other, and you start to kind of assume that everyone's thinking like each other, as that's just human. So what you have to do is say, all right, I'm all of a sudden sick with an ear infection. We have to get this done. Now Rachel is going to walk in and do this for me. Right. And so you write your steps and instructions, not for the other people on your team, but for this anonymous person scenario that says, you need to take this over and do this for me. And that's how that's how big teams do the steps and processes well, where they don't write them for each other. With the, like, it's very objective in that sense, and that is how you do it. But I've never done that myself. Never felt like I needed to. But it's something for people to consider if you are writing up steps between a small team, and everyone's like, I assume that Jane here will do all the steps I think she will, but then she's like, no, I always do it different. You're like, crap. So you write it for someone, not Jane, not yourself. Like, I need you to do these steps. And then you tell the whole team, everyone must follow this, even if it's out of the norm for you. That kind of approach is more like how the military does it, I believe. And I guess it works for them. I haven't heard, I assume they're better at those kind of things than what my dev team would be, but I don't know.
Yeah, and I think the point you're making there is they've got to, not to speak of people like inanimate objects. Yeah, they've got piece parts they can swap in and out. They've got a developer who knows Python. They could pull it from the next room over if the one working on the project goes down ill. So that makes perfect sense. Is you need to be writing it for the anonymous person who is not on your team, and that you can only take that so far, right? Even that you have to make assumptions on what they know, and you're gonna find yourself making it. You're gonna find some assumptions that you've made incorrectly. Yeah. which is okay. That's you know what, that's part of figuring all this out. So, but yeah, that was, if there was one major takeaway, is we got to get better at writing down the steps and all agreeing to them before we go forward. It worked out fine, but we also were in a touch of scrambling mode when one person was ready to go outside of maintenance mode, and the others were like, "Well, wait a minute, no, we're not."
Yeah.
So that was really the major takeaway. I would say, other than that, verify all the, as best you can, verify all the things you can't test.
Yeah.
Like I said, we went through a dry run, but that means we didn't actually do the thing. And when we went and did the thing, what did we find? We found that our RabbitMQ server wasn't brought up to the same plan that the original was. So go through everything that you're not testing. Go through. So what we should have done was we should have sat down and gone, okay. And this is what we did. This is how we figured out the problem. Is when that one third of clients weren't running, we're like, okay. And he came back to me about after 20 minutes. It's like, I don't know why this isn't working. Everything should be working. I'm like, okay, start at the beginning. And that was all. Like, start at the beginning. Where should we start? And we start with a certain timestamp hits. And when that timestamp hits, these clients should be running. I said, what happens when those clients run? Walk through every step. And he's like, okay. He's like, okay, well, we send them to Celery. We send them to RabbitMQ. I'm like, okay, stop. Let's go check those. And sure enough, that's where it was. But if that wasn't it, we would have continued down the steps.
Yep.
And what we hadn't done was, because that wasn't something we had tested, we hadn't gone and made sure that those things were all set up properly. And that's the other thing, is you have to verify those things you can't test.
Yeah.
As best you can. Because there are always going to be unseens. And that's when you rely on the flexibility of your development team and their problem-solving skills, which were on full display this day, and they did a great job. But that's where we ended up. So I think those are the two biggest ones I can think of.
Makes sense. I mean, it's always, I mean, I remember trying to do big changes on systems, but they were always, I don't know, to me, it felt easier because of either a small user base, or I wasn't splitting up databases, like nothing on the scale of what you had to do there. So in most cases, the rollback would be really simple. It just wouldn't be that complex. That point of no return scenario, which a lot of companies have faced. I think the other area I would say I've heard people doing, and this is kind of like test-driven development, was there any point of the process that you could automate checks? Like, hey, write a script that then checks, is this URL pointed at the right place for this client? Is the RabbitMQ back online? Like, I think some firms will take the time at a different scale kind of company where they say, all right, they run a series of tests before the change, and then they have a set of expectations after the change, and they run that. And they, within seconds, will find, oh, wait, something is not right because of the very basics are not, our script is finding things that we're not expecting. That's hard. And it's more code to write.
I certainly think we could have written a script to check that all the URLs were pointing the right place. That would not have made me comfortable enough.
Yeah.
because of the size, because of the, not size, but the importance of the change we made, I wanted to lay eyes. I want somebody to lay eyes on everything.
Yeah.
And make sure it was good. Now, in the end, we've got over 200 clients. We didn't hit all 200. We got through about 150, didn't find a single one that was off. And at that point we said, we're 75% through. And it's a fairly random selection. We're comfortable with that going forward and at least turning off read-only mode while we continue checking.
Yeah.
So that was fine. And in the end, it turned out just fine. But that was pretty much the case of I wouldn't have trusted a script to check that. And I actually I was only going to be comfortable after we laid eyes on them.
Yeah.
To make sure of it. Maybe if we had to do it numerous times, sure. Then I'd start to be a little bit more comfortable with the script. I'd want the script written by somebody different than who wrote the script to make the changes. Just so that there's a different mindset going into it. But yeah, that's my answer to that is I wouldn't have trusted a script for that.
Okay. Well, there's a few problems with this episode compared to previous. One, we didn't mention college football at all. That will hurt. At no point did you degrade Apple at all, and at no point did we argue where you were wrong and I was right, or vice versa, which isn't going to happen anyway. So it's a much different episode where we actually talk through an experience with a very even-keeled mindset, which means our ratings will drop significantly, and I'll have people go, you all should argue more. Go back to the more recent episodes.
For sure. Yeah, not the college football part of it. They're probably not looking forward to that, but they probably do like the arguing. And I know the majority of people are on my side regarding Apple anyway, so it's all right.
Probably, yeah. That's a good way to think about it in your shoes. But it's got to feel good after you get through this change and the system runs for a while. You can kind of like take a deep breath and not have to worry about, you're not going to make an immediate huge change in the near future, or at least you don't have to worry about it. So I do remember the feeling of like, okay, we got over this scaling hump.
Yeah.
And in a way, there's nothing that you said about the experience that I was like, whoa, why didn't you just do that later? Like sometimes I see companies do the scaling change and they just try to move the whole house. They try to change the code base. They try to maybe change the client and the server at the same time. And I'm like, no. Like you need to break all of these things up. And if they truly don't affect each other, do not scale. Like usually the biggest scaling efforts I usually hear are people changing from the monolithic code base to the server oriented or server, whatever the hell, the SOA. And even then I'm like, why the heck would you switch everything at once? Like keep that monolith as long as you can and break out small services. Like this whole idea of we got to change everything at once is so dangerous. And
right.
I didn't hear that in what you were doing. Like it sounded very isolated. We need to change our persistence layer to work better. But you didn't say, well, we also decided to change a bunch of reporting systems at the same time. Like, no. Don't do that if you don't have to.
Right. Well, and in the spirit of full disclosure, I kept talking about splitting the database up. What we truly did was we truly replicated the whole Heroku environment. So we've got 3 Heroku environments running.
Interesting.
for those clients now. And we did that again because we were in a mode of we need to get this done by fall.
Yeah.
We spent too much time on a previous feature to where we could fully build out what we wanted to build out, which is what I was talking about database per client. We call that the backend portability project, which is where we can move data wherever we need to move it. We said, hey, to get it done by fall, we just need to duplicate everything and just have and the good. Now, is there some cost involved in that? Yes. You know what? It in the end, the cost is minimal to the gains we made.
Yeah, I got to say, I love that approach you took on that. Like, you didn't bring that up earlier, but dang it, like that is smart. Like you're stuck right now in the scenario that if you don't combine the code bases, you will have to make changes on all three.
Right.
But temporarily, you got your persistence layer scaled, and now you can go back later and consolidate the code bases to be more efficient in terms of the cost. But you took it step by step.
Right.
And that's awesome. Like, that's the approach I love to hear about when folks are making a big change. You don't try to be perfect at once. You don't try to be the most efficient at once. That's what you strive for over time. That doesn't overwhelm, and you get the job done in the time frame you need. So that's awesome. I like that.
Yeah, and we have learnings that we can now take forward as well. Now, where we want to go is we want to be able to run from one Heroku environment to all these disparate databases, or from a select number of Heroku environments to all these disparate databases. But in the end, this was the least impactful, least risk. It was duplicate environments and be done with it. Again, we're taking some dollars hits for that, and that's okay. They're not significant to where we're mortgaging the company's future to take shortcuts. That's not what we did at all.
But you also preserved client confidence. No downtime, no change in service. There's no way you could. I'm going to take a big guess here, but I don't feel that whatever extra costs you're paying are anywhere near what would happen if a client went down right at the beginning of the school year.
Right.
I just can't fathom that.
Because if a client went down, multiple clients were going down. Because it would have been an overload. And we've seen performance gains since we did this. So it was the cost was minimal to the benefits we got out of it.
Yeah. I mean, the moral of the story might be, while your efforts to scale are about efficiency in the end over the long run, the process to make the scaling changes, you should allow for inefficiencies in a few scenarios, because the gains over the long term are better. The stability is maintained. And really, unless you quit working on it today, you're going to make changes that get you back to the efficiency you want. I wish more managers and folks in these scenarios would think creatively, where efficiency isn't always the answer.
Well, and
every level.
Sure. And the reason I wanted to make that distinction was I also wanted to make the point that because we've done it once, we can now do it as many times as we want.
Yeah.
If we ever get to the point where we're starting to get overloaded again, we can split it up again and be done with it. Now, like I said, back-end portability is our next big back of house project. Non-business facing is the way I'll put it. It's our next big non-business facing project. And that'll allow us to be able to move data wherever we want and do what we need to do. That's also going to allow us to trim data, to back up history and put some history on a database on ice, but yet not have it in the main database, so that we can keep the size of the database smaller. And so on and so forth. So that's a lot of what we're headed for next. We made this change to help us through the fall terms. And then by spring, I think we'll be back in portability, and we'll be even further along.
Cool.
Yeah, really good. It was exciting. We did that on Wednesday. We have Monday morning meetings with everyone, and Monday morning it was like no, it wasn't Monday. It was Tuesday, because Monday was Labor Day.
Yeah.
Like, we just pulled that off. We just made a major change, and we saw very little negative impact.
Yeah.
We spent 2 hours the night of fixing the RabbitMQ stuff. Was it 2 hours? It was probably an hour and a half. We spent about that time fixing the RabbitMQ stuff. But other than that, it all ran fine. And some of our larger clients are seeing performance gains. So
awesome.
It worked out great.
Well, that's great. I mean, that's cool. So that's how you want those things to go. So
exactly.
I think
exactly.
This is a great. I think this is a great episode. Just to hear about other, like, I like to hear about these types of efforts, because it's one of those things that, because every company doing a scaling thing is really isolated. It's really hard to generalize how to deal with all these scenarios. But so you don't hear about them that much. But I think it's great to hear not just an abstract, like, hey, in general, here's the top 10 things you should do in scaling or in a major change. It's more of like, here's how we dealt with our particular scenario. Take what you can from it. I think that's, I like to hear those stories too. So
for sure,
great. I think that's a good topic.
For sure.
All right.
Awesome.
I think we're good for the week. What's up for you next week?
You know what? Not anything to that scale, which is good news. Not a whole lot. I'm trying to kick this ear infection. I think I've got it down enough to where I can go officiate some high school football tonight. Get yelled at by some more coaches, some more kids. So that'll be good. And then nothing big project wise for any of the I take that back. Over the next week and a half, 2 weeks, we're going to be making a change for Construction Specialties from pieced together email systems. So we've got people on various Gmail accounts, but not Google for business accounts. We're going to take all that and push it towards Outlook. Everybody on Outlook, everybody through Exchange, everybody through one mail server, that sort of thing. So that's another change we're making.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, that makes sense to eventually get to that point when you have so many different people talking. Probably makes sense from compliance efforts too.
What about you?
Next week, I'm going to be splitting time between a couple of projects, some changes for a client on a Rails app, and we're getting closer to testing the React Native Firebase app. So split work there. Some personal projects that I think I'll reveal later that are interesting.
Sure.
And I'm trying to think if there's anything else big right now. My wife, Megan, has just taken on an additional WordPress-based project, really revolving around accessibility. So
nice. That's
kind of a new thing for her, and I might have to learn a few things because she's doing more research on it than I have to have done in the past. So
sure.
I'll be the kind of the backup for that, and that should take up most of next week. It's cool. It's interesting. Usually this time of the year is always like after Labor Day is like hit the ground slammed with the new stuff. But thankfully I've managed things so that everything is cool. We'll just keep working on what we got going. So it's a nice difference of the typical post Labor Day week for me. So
sure,
that's it.
Very good. Well, we'll talk again next week.
Correct. Later.
Thanks for listening to the CTO Think podcast. Show notes and previous episodes can be found on our website at ctothink.com. Reviews on Apple iTunes are always appreciated and help promote the show. Patreon contributions help us to produce episode transcripts, which allow people that are deaf or hard of hearing to access the show. If you have feedback, ideas, or want to be a guest, please email us at hello@ctothink.com. Show music is Dumpster Dive by Mark Wallach, licensed by PremiumBeat.com. Voiceover work by MeganVoices.com. You'll hear from us next week.